It's so wonderful to see so many people. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vincent, Alessi. I'm the director here, and I'm going to chair this panel discussion. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered this afternoon on the unceded lands of the Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to voice my support of the national voice and also the treaty that's being developed here in Victoria. I'd like to welcome our three guests, our three artists, Abdul-Rahman, Nell, for this discussion today. We're going to put out a whole heap of questions. I don't think we're going to get through them all because I don't know now, but we'll see how we go. And hopefully it's a pretty fluid discussion. If we do have time at the end, we will take some questions, but we'll just see how we go. So I want to start, if I can ask each of you, I'm going to start with a difficult question. If there was one thing that you had to talk about that defines your practice very briefly, just wondering if we could start with what that might be. Was something you know?
Birth and death.
Birth and death.
Love and politics. Let's go. Let's
You
go.
got two just like excellent. Okay, there's plenty there to work with, which we'll work through. Last night, when at the opening, I mentioned that when I was thinking about the shows and I was trying to work out what they are three individual shows, but what joins them together, because once they're in a space like this, they are in conversation, even though they've been thought of as individual shows. And I talked about this idea of the personal versus the universal. I wanted to ask each of you, are you very conscious of this relationship in your work? Is it something that you pay particular attention to when you're developing the work? Or do you think the idea of this kind of, this personal versus universal is something that's inherent in art anyway, once you put it out into a space, it just naturally speaks to the universal? We'll go.
First thing.
100%. Isn't nearly everything out there starts off with something extremely personal, extremely subjective, extremely often right in front of me, so close in front of me, it's inside my head, kind of thing. It starts off with what is immediately in front of me in my world. But from that you can create something. If you have an authentic relationship with that, you can create something universal. It won't just happen. So you need to put a lot of thought into that, and you put the thought into and the feeling does that. It just be if you can say something true, then it becomes universal, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I think my works are so different from each other, but then connected by that thread that the personal is a kind of core to the work. So I feel like if you look at my work over my whole life, I've kind of written my life story through my work. But then most of the work, maybe to someone else, is actually addressing their social and political concerns. And so there is that kind of, I guess, constant reflecting between the two and what that does as well. So even with the work that's upstairs, the self-care action series, I was thinking now, these are the 40 things that I need to do to kind of stay sane in a really challenging, difficult world and dealing with things that we all have to deal with in our life and struggles as human beings. But those are my tools, so I'm not telling people what to do, they're just my tools. But then so many people have come up to me and sort of even like with a tear in their eye saying like, oh, that word sing is such an important word for me, or they've reflected what their tools are. So I think what Abdul-Rahman said, which is that exactly the same thing, which is that if you're kind of true to yourself and you share it with people in an honest way, that they find themselves in it and they feel welcome in it as well.
Yeah, ditto. The personal and the universal are wholly interchangeable, and it's not just the experience being an artist, it's the experience being human and having life. Anything with life is interchangeable with life. Like And that thing of like separation is just a perversion of our minds. Like we all share the same air. Like that, and that's kind of like back to your first question. The fundamental question of my work is like trying to dispel the illusion of my mind that I'm in here and you're out there.
Yeah, and we've had a conversation last week when we were talking about this idea of everything being connected, this idea of interconnectedness.
And there's endless ways to express it.
Yeah.
Endless.
Yeah.
Endless, and that's magic.
Yeah.
And you all have it. We all have it.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing I realised reflecting on the works is just how important text is. Now, Kate, it's obviously your body of work upstairs because it's a text-based work, but you know, Abdul-Rahman, you know, the three works you've got in the show are all based on Islamic hadith, so which is a form of text, and now also yours, you know, the reference to whether it's lyrics from song, whether it's Buddhist sayings, etc. I'm just wondering if you can each speak to that idea of the importance of those texts and how text defines, or not defines, but how it shapes and informs what you do.
Look, I mean, in my head, there's always the work, and then there's the title. It's so important to the work. It just completes work or points it in the way you want it to. It can really change the direction of it. To me, my works are so like, you know, from my perspective, where they come from, they're very specific and they relate to very specific things, you know, historical things, cultural things, religious identity, blah blah blah, my parents, whatever. But that whole story, I want it to be valuable to people because I mean, I nearly always write something about the works I make. It's just, I feel like I need to have it available to people to explain what I was thinking. But I'm very well aware once they're in a room and out in public space, they just take on their own life, they take on their own world and tell their own story. And so many people will bring something completely different to it. And that's just one of the things relating animals to everyone brings their own relationship to any particular animal. It's just like without even, you don't even need to tap into it. It's just that's a really deeply felt thing that people have with the natural world. Not that these are the animals, they're facsimiles of it, but you step into a room and it creates enough illusion that you already have that relationship. So I love the fact that they will tell a completely different story to other people, and no, I love hearing them as well. It's just like, often they're wildly different. Yeah. So I think with any art, like, you know, going to any gallery, you see the work first, and then if you're interested, you go into the didactic and get more info. You need that to be available. I think it's important. We don't want to be like mysterious about this shit. We've got to be generous, you know. And also, if I can't write about it, who else is going to write about it? I haven't got that big.
I do like how you said there are facility of the animals, but I you know, the overriding comment that we had in a very short period of time that these works have been in here is just how real they look. So there is that element of the seduction of bringing people.
And you know, like getting a little baby camel doesn't look actually.
No, well, yes. It might have been shrunk, but you know, there is that thing of the seduction of how wonderful they are, and then that's like, you know, to me that once you read about it, but also the fact that the importance of the title, but also the importance of the in actually giving you the openness to then engage with other ideas.
Oh yeah, I love it when there's more to discover, because you know, nothing in any artwork is by accident or mistake. Everything's been thought about. And I also really love reading what artists have written, because there's no artist I know who isn't really bloody articulate, and like in part they're all very over-educated. And they can write, you know, they can do things with what, you know, they work with, but with words, every artist I know, even the shyest of them is just ridiculously articulate, and it's just kind of meant to be.
Kate, can you talk, because you use text quite often in your works?
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day, because there are these, text has always come up in my work. It's always there as a form, but it's become more at the front of what I've been doing since probably 2019-20, when I started the Anonymous Was a Woman series. And from that point to now, so it's about almost 4 years, I've only really used text, which is probably the longest running kind of continuous use of it in every work or series. in my 20-something years as an artist, and I was thinking about why have I done that? And I feel like that nothing is entirely universal, so the texts I've been using are in English, so that means only people who kind of can read and speak English are accessing them. But they are maybe more accessible than the specificity of a person or a kind of object or something that's being represented. So I like that the texts have a really broad sense of interpretation. But I was also thinking, and maybe this is like a little bit off of me, I was thinking about our 3 works last night after the opening, and I was thinking how initially I thought, oh, they make sculpture, and it's not like hyper intensity in its color, and I've made these flat 2D things that are really colorful, and it's text. But then I thought the subtext of all the 3 shows felt to me like this really kind of beautiful energy almost of these works that represent the individual artists' ways of sustaining themselves and sharing our kind of spiritual and guiding kind of forces and ways of being that are almost like they're almost like guardian kind of forces that take care of us and then we share. And so I thought there's actually this text about how and I'm speaking for other people, that's my experience of your work and your work as well, is that it shares this kind of text of the person who made it. And yeah, that was just a text I thought about in relation to the 3 shows.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that these works are now sculptural, but there is a sculptural element to your work because they might be on stretchers, but there's that wonderful texture of the knitting, which sort of just breaks that that flatness of the painting away.
Yeah.
Yes, they're still on the wall, but to me they really are objects, and it's sort of a call to art, sort of a call to action sort of objects.
Yeah.
Now the text for you.
Yeah. Hey, I'm just aware a lot of your squash, there's
There's
a
more
space
here,
if anyone wants to
everyone
walk around.
Yeah.
I understand, I can see you're all. You can even shimmy.
You can even shoot through here.
You can walk straight through the middle. Yeah. Now's the
Down as well.
Now's the whole
Yeah, so.
Big audience and expected.
Yeah, well, you go
We
around.
expected a good job. Just kidding.
Yeah, okay, so text in my work is very, very important. And like lots of teenagers, do you remember those like army disposal stores and you get those backpacks and they were like
Canvas one.
yeah, the canvas ones and they were yellow and light pink
Yeah.
and light blue. Okay. Yeah, the fonts for bands, I was obsessed. Like, and I was the best at it at school, so I could copy the fonts from the album covers onto the mission bag. And like, I love the shape of letters, not just, and the shape of numbers. Yeah, and as much as I like how words look, and it's really important to me with my titles, uppercase and lowercase. So I drive a lot of people crazy. Like the T in the middle of the word has to be lowercase, even though the rest might be in capitals. So there's often text that appears in my work, and text like Kate. Like I've used text in paintings, not that this works here have text in them, but to say what I mean. Like it's another format to say what you're trying to say and communicate, or a key to a door, like, so for those that wish to take it, but then it has aesthetic properties as well. So that's this sort of aesthetic and meaning of words embedded in the work. And then the titles are really, really important to me. And I'm actually not very articulate, I don't think at all. I feel like I'm much more articulate in my work. I struggle to write well. I can do it, it just takes a long time. It doesn't come easily. But I just like 2 words against each other. And And a lot of my works, you know, I like words that shouldn't belong together, like black snow, or, you know, I always think about like black milk. And so there's a work just by way of sharing a title in the show. A little tiny word, I don't know if you've seen it on the windowsill, and it's got two eggs on top of each other, and it's called Two Stories. And I wrote like stories, like two people's stories, but then this house is 2 stories. And then I was starting to think about one house, 2 stories, and like how that's that same thing with the personal and the universal. So just in that little work is my whole way of thinking. And then the title of the big tree out the back is called On a Withered Tree Ghosts Bloom. And that comes from a Zen sort of saying, which is on a withered tree, a flower blooms. And it's that life between life and death is actually there. There's no line, because a dead tree will still have microorganisms, and there's nothing more beautiful, and even we all know too after a bushfire. When you see that sprig of green and you're like, what a miracle, yeah.
Which leads me beautifully to my next question. Thank you so much. And that is that the work on a with a tree goes blue, which is a new work for this space. It's a work that very much responds to site and place. You talked about the title of that little work being 2 stories, which is referencing the house. But that work is very much a response not only to Linden but to St. Kilda. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I don't know if many of you know, but Linden is actually the name of the German lime tree. Yeah, but limes don't grow on it. That's my understanding. Yeah. It's called lime tree, but limes don't grow on it. And so I was just thinking about trees and houses, and so my show is called Old Wave, New Wave, like old waves of people coming through the house and new waves of people coming through the house. And the waves at St. Kilda Beach, I was thinking about the beach and the house. And I was thinking about the history of music here, and the SB and the crystal ballroom, and that's why I use crystals in the crystal work. And then I was thinking about the ghosts of the house and the people of the house, and almost like this tree and some residue of the people and the house, and the spirit sort of burst forth. And when everyone was gone, it grew.
Yeah. And the other thing I really love about the fact that the tree is sort of growing out to the house. So one of the images one of the things I've always loved is when man-made structures are abandoned, that over time they just get completely engulfed by nature, and that the idea that the idea of man-made structures is actually something that's quite temporary, but nature is something that's quite permanent. And one of the things I keep thinking about with that work is that the fact that it's growing out of the ground and it's come through the building, and actually really speaks to the palimpsest of this place. So that if this building, before this building was here, this was a really important Indigenous site, meeting site. That yes, now we have this sort of building, and it speaks to the history of this building, which was my home, my hotel, and now a gallery. But also that while the trees, it's withered, it's lifeless, it's very animated, so it's still in a state of growth. So I think it also speaks to what happens after all this is gone. At some point, this may not be a gallery anymore, it may be something else. And I think it really beautifully speaks to those things. Is that a fair kind of assessment of that work?
Yeah.
Thank you. The other really significant work in this exhibition is the work in the front room here, and it's got a really beautiful long title, which I'm not going to read out.
Do you want me to say it?
You can say it.
It's called A White Bird Flies in the Mist, A Black Bird Flies in the Night, A Woman Walks Wild and Free, She's Not Afraid to Die.
Absolutely stunning. Thank you. It is a work that's 15 years old. You chose it as a pairing with the new work, and I'm just wondering if you can perhaps tell us your thinking around that, and how the two works made it, 15 years apart, how you see them now in conversation.
Yeah, well, maybe similarly to my fellow exhibitors, that often as an artist you can go away from things and then you figure out and come back around again. And so they're 15 years apart, but there's similar concerns, you know, and the, you know, the black, the white, the visibility, invisibility, because like you don't know, is the woman in the front all seeing or is she blind? And then, yeah, the invisibility or visibility, where's that tree coming from? Where's it growing from? So there, I even surprised myself at the consistency of my intention, even though the manifestation is so different or apparently different, because there's no figure in the background. So I thought about juxtaposing it that if you walk in this way, you see the figurative person, woman with the guys, but then you go in the background and you are the figure under the tree. And so I really, the absence of a figure there allows the viewer to be there, animate the tree.
Look, can I turn to your work? Particularly, can we give you practical magic, which is the work over there. To me, it's a great example of the many threads in your practice that come together. You know, it speaks to identity, it speaks to history, to personal memories. So it takes its visual framing, as I said, from the hadith, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Is that correct? Is that this phrase?
That's pretty much it, I think.
But it's also very much in response to your mother and her experiences as an immigrant, but also the kind of relationship you have with your mother and what she's passed on to you. Can you talk to us about how those kind of things come together? You know, how the event opens up that possibility for other conversations.
That work, I mean, sort of a little bit atypical of me, where a lot of my works are, in some ways, there's some really direct links in here. I can see how this is almost illustrated with this. This one was like, I actually struggled with the beginning of this work, so I was really keen to make a work about, a lot of my works are about my family, they're like portraits of my family, or they're generally an animal of some sort. My mum is not a camel.
I should have made that clear.
I was trying to sculpt an oleander plant, and I found my limits as a sculptor, man. Sculpting plants in wood is just like, nature does it better. So I really kind of got stuck halfway through, and then I was sort of, basically I wanted to illustrate this idea of when Mum came to Australia. Mum's Malay, Dad's white Australian, Dad's been Muslim since 1970, Mum's always been Muslim, but when we moved over to Perth, I was a baby then, and you got stuff in the backyard, you got your little, backyard, we had backyards, people had backyards. Beans and all this sort of stuff, and I'd see Dad walk around eating stuff, so as a kid I'd be like, everything's up for grabs, I'm going to eat everything. And Mum, who was very well aware of, what the plant life in Malaysia was like, Australia was a completely different story, there's almost no overlap. So she ended up going to study horticulture, and she's become quite the expert on native flora, as a way of keeping me alive, and purely practical, purely practical. I mean, of course she loves it, she's a horticultural, botanical painter and stuff like that. So that's where the thinking started, and I was trying to work out how I can talk about that. And then I went back to this, there are so many hadiths and they vary so much, and I am by no means an expert on any of this. I don't even speak Arabic, everything is mediated through this, and I read it all in English, all these things. A lot of form complex going on, but it's also very authentic. And there was always that hadith which was, trust in God but tie your camel, and I just thought this just described my mum. Basically the ultimate compliment you can give someone is to describe them as a practical person. If you're a practical person, that's it. And there's a real magic in understanding the world. That is a form of magic. And it's as base as that, as base as people knowing what's around and what they can eat, what they can't. That's the level of magic is that's why we're all here. So I just went back to that hadith and in a way illustrated that. Another sort of way I like to work is when one object contains multiple truths and sometimes opposing truths, contradictory things, but everything is true within that. So at a glance it's a camel on a noose, but it's also when you sort of pull back and read some of the support and some of the things like that, it is more than that, but I wanted it to drag people in for those reasons, It's not a shrunken camel. It is based off I use a lot of taxidermy references, and I used a taxidermy stillborn camel. So it was as small as a camel could get. But you see how big they get. I'm not going to sculpt that yet. Not yet. And so then out of these three works, that's the oldest. That's from 2016. But I love what you're saying now. And so I've been an artist now since my 11th year. And so it's now finally, I started as a bit of a, I don't think an old mature student, but finally I've got a little bit behind so you can look back and you can see the different avenues in your work, and it's not like these ideas that you sort of step out and come back to, they're all kind of concurrent, but you have to kind of look back and see what you've done, and then you can start sort of piecing these different streams together, which is really fun. Looking back at your own toys is a lot of fun. Just what Nell was saying before about Linden and the Linden wood, I think I missed an opportunity here because I carved the snake for this show as a new work. And in lime wood, it's the same thing, and that is the amazing wood to carve. It's the only other wood I carve with puppies or in gelatin. Just that I didn't actually have much, where it's much harder to get hold of. Would it make sense to do something in Linden wood for Linden? Can't go backwards now.
We can rewind it, you can just tell us you did it on purpose.
I wouldn't tell you what's in there.
Just on that work, you use chandeliers in other works. This is
Oh,
our
I love
work that we in the show that you use. Can you talk about the reference of the chandelier and why it appears in the work?
You know, it is, it's one of those things where what's personal, what's directly in front of you. Like, I grew up in this very haunted, quite shitty 1920s house in Inby Park in Perth. So it was like a, not railway cottages, but it's, you know, and Australian architecture is like this. It was built in the 1920s, but it's basically bit deco, bit federation, full of 70s like additions and that. So it was a bit of a mismatch. And what was modern in 1926 in Perth was probably about 1890 in the rest of the world. But we had these hallways. This hallway is haunted, so it's such a creepy place. I love hallways, that's why I find this hallway.
Is that what you asked me this house? Is that what you asked me when you arrived at this house? Was
Oh, hell yeah, I was always going to ask. So, anyway, we had these three really shit chandeliers down the hallway, and to me, there's something really aspirational. It's like anyone can feel rich with this thing up there, with a few dangles, a few spider webs, there's almost this achievable aspiration. The other thing I like to use them for is not so much this, I always like to bring them down low just because I just spend a lot of time lying on the floor looking at the ceiling. And just being up amongst it, it becomes a different thing. But there's some really famous images of this, I think it's like,
What about
in
the
Spain.
snake? Is there a connection with the snake and the chandelier?
Yeah, they're the same word.
That's like
Not an accident. But I'll get to it. But I've seen like, I'm trying to remember, I think it's in Andalus, somewhere, these mosques, where they have this vast open space, and then they'll have almost this layer of chandeliers across the room, which create this plane above. And there is something really amazing about that. It's not just one light source, it's sort of really kind of heavenly light sources. And I love that they're playing with that, bring you up into that plane, messing with the heights. Should I explain that work a little briefly? I'm a trendy. That was going back to another idea, because this show, this Burak is sort of all the information about Burak comes from different hadiths. Hadiths are sayings of the Prophet, it's sort of recorded sayings of the Prophet rather than something from the Quran. They're like quotes. And they vary a lot. Some of them are really didactic and instructive, some of them are very metaphorical, some of them people have never worked out. I've come across a new one which I have to make a work about, and nobody's ever worked it out. At some point, somebody asked the Prophet, what does the world rest on? And he said, the buffalo and the fish. And I was like, and people have been interpreting that ever since. And then it's like, he must have meant something, but nobody knows. It's one of those things. This one, there was this hadith which talked about the day of judgment, basically when you die, any unpaid charity that you built up over your life will come back to you with a big black snake and announce that I'm your treasure, and then you've got to deal with it. And I thought, especially for a sort of culture which is quite visually austere, we don't have any Easter bunnies and Santa Claus. It's visually austere. So to really describe something with a big black snake was just I wanted to bring it out, illustrate it. And again, that chandelier comes in because I see them as sort of putting something in an otherworldly space and even bring the light down to it. And when I actually set up, a lot of the works, I don't know exactly what they're doing, and it's a good idea, but until they're set up, put under lights, because they're sort of existing bits all over the studio or craze. And when I finally got the chandelier above it, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. It was like this, it created this almost a void in the light, so there's this pool of light, and then there was this dark shadow, So I was like, I lit the shadow for some reason, and I went, wow, photographer's going to have a good challenge of this because I couldn't get a good photo with it. Hopefully someone can. The other cool thing about that work was I came here and Nell's got her black figure with pearl eyes. And I made this snake, the black figure with, it's got marbled pearl eyes for broom. It just occurred to me this year because I made this one in January. And Nell was saying, like, when did you make this work? It's like, oh, this is the last work I made. And so they're like 15 years apart. I've never seen another work with pearl eyes and the black figure. I was like, that's cool, super creepy, super cool. So that's kind of the story of the work. The chandeliers, you bring them down and everything becomes otherworldly. You know, and for a $150 Bunnings chandelier, you can
Oh, that's for bunnies.
yeah, this is all value added. That costs a lot more now. Yeah. But you know what I mean? I love that. It is a chintzy plastic thing, but it can say all of that. You know, a great selfie light too. Yeah.
Kate, can we talk about your work upstairs? Because that also comes from a quite a personal decision, but to go back a bit. So does your practice of knitting, which was prompted by personal circumstances. Can we start there? Can you talk to us about why you started knitting?
Yeah. So I was at art school at VCA in 2000, and I had entered art school after probably like 3 years of painting, but a lifetime of really drawing and painting. And my brother, Billy, who was 21 that year, died. And I went home in the middle of the art school year, and I went home and my mom was on the couch doing two things I'd never seen her do, which was smoking and knitting. And she had always been a knitter, but she just had focused on her career for like the last kind of 20 years really heavily. And so it was like we had the cigarette and then the knitting. And we just didn't do a lot of talking. I mean, our family was in a pretty immersive state of grief, and we are a family of big talkers, but there wasn't a lot of talking happening. And I just sat alongside her and just picked it up kind of by the practice of seeing it. There was a little bit of conversation about how. And it was like one of those moments, I guess, in your life that is defining of your whole life in a way with no words, which is interesting because we're talking about text and words. And I just was very interested in the materiality of it, but it felt like very metaphorically correct because I felt like our lives were falling apart, but we were next to each other, putting something back together.
Yeah. Thank you. But also I think and it plays out, I think, in your knitting circles upstairs. But those knitting circles are very much about community, about conversation. I love the fact that, like for what we're doing for the next 3 months, it's asking people who don't know each other to sit there and talk while they're knitting.
Yeah, it replicates that.
Yeah, and so this, there's this real beautiful sense of community, and of course people are contributing to something that's much bigger, which is a work that's going to be shown later on this year. So yeah, that sense of community, I think, is really, really at the core of your work too. Even in the self-care action series, it's actually, you did mention earlier that they were sort of 40 phrases you had written down for yourself, but particularly coming out of COVID, they very much a reminder about, as a community, how we should be looking after ourselves.
Yeah.
And with the self-care action series, again, that you started that out of sort of a very particular part of your life, and you were, I think you've said that it was you were an artist, an activist, parent, a partner, and that you were, you had to take stock of actually how can I keep doing all these things, and that work sort of grew out of that.
Yeah.
Can you talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I'm gonna wind back a little because I feel like a few things got covered in that arc of questions. So I just want to go back again for a second to the moment about my mom, because what happened then after I learned the knitting was that I felt like it's interesting how these like magical element things happen in childhood, which then carries over for your whole life into your work. That I just felt like it's a medium which really is able to hold and translate both personal experiences, connections to other people, and histories of women making textiles, which is not a singular history, so lots of men have also, and people of all genders have made textiles, but there is a very, in a sense, around the world, throughout history and throughout time, there are these histories, and in all these different cultural contexts, of women sitting alongside each other, often in this kind of circular way, making things together. So it kind of connected to that universal history, but it also connected to my own experience of grief and loss, which then made me feel that that is a medium I could use really for my whole life to probably tell any story I need to tell. And because my work isn't really just about me, but it's often about women's histories, queer histories, and a kind of fight for visibility and resilience in, against forces of power, oppression, or marginalization, that I felt that that's a really perfect medium for that as well, because knitting has an arc and craft has an arc as a medium which was something conventionally assigned to women to do in many cultures around the world, and now has been reclaimed by a lot of women and feminists as a material that voices their concerns. And so the knitting circles, which are out there, is a way of bringing me as an artist who has a lot of platform for my work and a lot of opportunities and a lot of kind of dialogue and discourse around it, bringing myself into conversation with people who might not be so visible in the way that they use craft. They might just do it in their house or on the weekend or make a scarf for someone, and it's a way of saying we are actually doing the same thing, and we can do that together, and we can make something together.
Yeah.
And so that's what was happening upstairs, is like as soon as I sit down and people join, we all just sit and we connect and we share our stories and we make things and we always teach each other things. So I learned some things today I didn't know before, 2 things, and I was teaching people things as well. So that's what happens as well with it. And just the only other point you raised about the resilience and all that, I wanted to address that as well, if that's okay. Which was that I think for so many years, like many, many years, I've been making this work that's about the way women and queer people and people who experience forms of marginalization on the basis of race or religion or sexuality or gender, like making works which speak to these times we're in and how much fight and kind of struggle there is for change and how little change occurs. And I do it within institutions I work in as well. And that over time, people can look at you and think, wow, you're really working so hard at making these changes, and that's really inspiring. But in fact, it's quite a toll that gets taken on anyone who speaks truth to the, powers and, pains that occur in the world. And I just thought it's really important to probably talk without speaking to other people's experience, speak to my own experience of how I can sustain to even do that. And so that wall of text might seem optimistic to some, but to others they're like, oh, that's like a full-time job doing all that stuff just to stay sane. And I'm like, because it is like a lot of work actually to take care of yourself. It's really easy to get a big bag and a bottle of gin and cry in the corner and stay up all night and scroll on your phone and give up on life. Like that's actually, in a way, that we all know how to go down that hard like go down the hard place where it's just like all just too hard. It's a lot of work to look after yourself and look after other people and speak the truth about what's going on in the world. That takes a ton of effort. And so I just wanted to make a work about that. But I made the work, and within 1 month of starting it, my father died. So it took me kind of full circle to that experience where knitting has been a way to write my story, take me through grief and loss, and share that with other people.
Yeah, and I think there is that, that there is this wonderful tension, if I could call it that, in that work, because as you said, like a simple thing like, you know, pat an animal, laugh, sing.
Which Abdul-Rahman objects to pat an animal.
I had a suggestion. I agree with everything. Suggested that she should
Pat a pet.
And I agreed. I was like, yes, let's
most
do
animals
it.
don't not want
Want to be
humans
patted.
touch
So
them.
don't just be patting any animals. We agreed that that could have a little asterisk amendment.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Pat an animal with its consent. Know whether it's some type of animal that likes to be patted. That's what it should
And your
say.
tiny snake, come on.
Yeah, I won't pat any of your animals.
Out of the 40, I should have chosen that one. But they are, in a way, like, you know, and I said this is one of the luxuries of working here is that if you're having a really crappy day, like I had a few last week, I could go in there and go, sing or whatever. But you're right, like there's this tension between the text being something that is obvious, you know, like we all laugh, but then there's that tension of actually, sometimes these things are really hard to do when everything else in life is going on. So I think, you know, while they have that sort of veneer of, yes, this should all be easy, there's this real tension about, actually there's a form of dedication to this.
And also the privilege, because actually often the people who are experiencing the worst things lack the power to do the things to actually support themselves. And in a way, that's an inherently problematic thing about self-care. I mean, self-care has been totally reclaimed by the Gwyneth Paltrow group wellness industry as something you can almost buy for yourself. But in fact, its origin is, the term comes from, was coined by the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and feminist activists in the 70s who were creating healthcare and community facilities to care for people who weren't being cared for by the systems that are supposed to take care of all of us. And so it has radical roots as something that is liberatory, empowers you to fight and struggle for change, and is a necessity for individuals and communities. But it also is really harder for people who are experiencing, challenges to do. So that's the difficulty with it. And that's why it should never be something that people tell you should do. And often when you're really upset, people say, take care of yourself. I'm always like, no, you take care of me. Somebody bring me some food and somebody call me on the phone, because that's the time where you need to ask for help, which is one of them. And accept care, which is the last one. Those are the first and last of the series. Ask for help and accept care. Because we're also not responsible for ourselves singularly. We live in a social fabric and network of relationships, and we need to use that in a way that's empowering to ourselves and other people, I feel,
You talked about that, the works are inherently political, and I think one of the ways that, well, at least one of the ways I interpret the self-care action series work is that it speaks to the kind of neoliberal world we work in, where success is measured by work, and what you accumulated, so those other things follow. So it is quite late. But I want to open this up to Abdul-Rahman and Nell as well. Do you feel there's a level of politics in your work as well?
Yes, 100%. It's just one of those things too. My name is a big old label. Funny enough, Abdul-Rahman Abdullah gets kind of typecast or something. Just one big mumble there. what
We
I
have talked about that before, because I think you said on your father's side, your father is like seventh generation.
yeah, I'm seventh generation.
You're seventh generation.
Ancestry.
But yeah, but there's that sort of, yeah, the idea that your name is a label, particularly in the last.
Oh yeah, that name is
years.
separated
Yeah.
from that story, well and truly. I do quite enjoy the fact that my name, you know, you slap a Muslim name, particularly over the last 20 years. I don't know, I always like seeing Muslims always think, oh no, that's moving on, and then it comes back. It always comes back. I'm smooth to get over it, you know. But I just think I like the idea of almost turning my back on what that might mean to people, and you know, that because a lot of Muslim arts will work with ideas of perception and politics and politicized identity, and that I love the idea of almost turning my back on that and not addressing that, you know, because that doesn't mean a lot to me. I want to sort of talk about, you know, that inner life, that inner world that we all have, and that identity of mine and what I've grown up with, and you know, how my stories are coloured in, how they're illustrated in my head. That's where it all comes from. There's so much, you know, Muslim, Malay, and Australian. I can't listen to me talk. You know, you can't mistake me for anything but with this fancy accent of mine. But I think it's almost a political act to not address that. And I did a panel once with Christian Thompson, and I was like, he said something about, you know what, it's as an artist, you can pick and choose whether it's a teaching moment. And not even a teaching moment, you don't have to give that to people, you don't have to teach them about who you are, you just have to do what you want and they can come to that. So I really sort of took that on board too. I don't want to instruct them, I'm not going to proselytise, you know, I've got all sorts of problems with it myself. So I don't make religious art, I don't make Islamic art, you know, that's it. I don't want to, that's a mistake to go down that track. But I do enjoy the fact that it is politicised no matter what I do, and it's turning my back on that and not trying to educate people about anything.
Yourself,
Yeah, that's a form of resilience. It's just like, you know, that's not me, I'm me. Yeah, and the world, and just your identity is all politicised. Just being a woman will be politicised. Just being, you know, attached to name, it's all politicised. But that is always imposed on you from the outside. So it's up to us whether or not we want to dress. And sometimes we want to do, we want to punch it in the face, and we do. And other times we don't need to because we're busy. We're sitting in the shower knitting.
Now, do you see sort of?
I like what Abdul said, everything's political. Whether you choose a plastic bottle, when you go through the fridge or you feel like you know, I've got a can here, everything.
Yeah.
I don't see life outside of politics, but then the flip side is true. Like, you know, someone gives you a kiss on the cheek and you look at a flower and there's no politics. You know, it's just love. So,
Yeah, which I think is one of the things that is consistent across all three. There's a real humanity about your work in all three of you, and that they're all in a way subtle. You're not, as you were saying, you're not beating people over the head about this. It's in there, but they're all very poetic in the way they speak to their audience. So I think, you know, they're very generous practices in many ways. We've got a few minutes. Does anyone have questions? We'll probably take 2 questions.
No questions.
We got one down the back, yeah.
I was just thinking about what you said, Vincent, about the whole idea of humanity, and it seems to me that there's a synchronicity between the 3 shows around the idea of maybe vulnerability. I was thinking of your work, Abdul-Rahman, these solitary creatures lying on the floor prone, Nell's ghosts, like a tribe of ghosts, and Kate's self-care aphorisms. Could you each speak to the idea of vulnerability? If you want.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, particularly in this room, that idea, because I mean, this is a baby, it's based on a foal. This one, you know, it's a baby camel. I mean, it's just a bit of it's a tool, I guess, but a baby animal in a space, a young one, like there is a certain relationship that any sane human will bring to that, you know, and it's like, I mean, and the bullrat, I'm not sure if it's a mammal, mythological creatures don't necessarily get categorized like that. But we have that relationship, you know, we're mammalian, we look after, you know, we see something that's more fragile and vulnerable, and it kind of just speaks to us. That's part of, I mean, there's many reasons why you put flowers, but I wanted to create this sense of like fragility, like at any point, it could just, any movement that'll go fluffing away, and it's an animal who hasn't quite got hold of its wings yet. Yeah, it's just, I think if you're shining spotlight into yourself and it's true, then it's vulnerable, but it's also like badass in a way, I think, because you sort of got the confidence to go, like, look at this, what's inside. Yeah, it's like, and that's what we kind of do with that. I also like that Nell and Kate, Nell just uses any material to it. She just puts her mind to anything and just smashes it out. It's amazing. I love that we all make. And it's like, yeah, there's a real joy in that, a real solo, some joy in that. Yeah.
I was going to say, making art is political. Making art is about being at peace with vulnerability. I mean, and being at peace with fragility and the impermanence of things. And then back to your first question about offering something of your personal experience to the world. And if you're not turning up in a vulnerable state, you're not turning up. Because we're all vulnerable. Your brother, gone. I had a stillborn baby, gone. Life and death, gone. Like we're here and we're gone. And life's mysterious and ferocious. And so yeah, it's in the work.
And there's depth in all of our work. And actually, I was thinking when you were talking about the political, that one of the things that makes your work so political to me is the way you talk about death. And I think that death in a kind of contemporary society isn't something a lot of people have that much familiarity or comfort with or talking about. And so talking about it and being unafraid to is actually a very political, transformative thing to do.
That's a good point, like when you're saying that we have so many people have a deep familiarity with it, but just not the words or the rituals. And I've been close enough to it enough of it that it's just a real thing where it's met with a silence, and that's strange. And that's where art can step in its own weird ways. But yeah, it's just one of those strange things where death is so familiar to nearly everyone. It's weird that it's such a joyful show that it's within almost every work. There's like, by the way, death.
Even as you talk about the stillborn animal, that is such a vulnerable kind of constitution of a sculptural form that has like a new life.
Oh, that I've known that piece of texture for quite a while, and I was like, oh my god,
It's
it's
such a way of honoring that animal and its life. It's really
stuffing it and showing to people all of the colours.
Yes, it is.
But no, I like what you said to me when we were having a chat the other day about the endpoints of birth and death, but life is eternal. We I think generally, you know, that we just think of the two ends and nothing exists outside of that. But I think that, you know, that really resonated with me, this idea that they're just really bookmarks, but things happen beyond those bookmarks.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. That most people think, and that's what culture makes us think, that life and death are opposite. But it's birth and death that are opposite, and life is eternal.
Yeah.
You've come from somewhere. It's just going to go on like the dead tree will bloom.
True.
It will fall into the earth.
Yeah, and regenerate. Yeah.
We're basically all really deeply religious on this,
You know, it's kind of question you about religion, but I'm going to go that slide. Spiritual religion.
Yeah, spiritual.
Yes. Well, we've run out of time. I just want to, some people know here that I've just begun here at Linden after spending time as an academic, and the three of you have, while you've been with us this week, but also while developing the shows, you've reminded me, and I'm sure you remind a lot of us, why we are engaged in these things, and it's because you bring a real sense of, through your work, a real sense of joy for the audience, but I think also the fact that you ask us questions, and it's reminded me why I got involved in the first place, because I have the privilege of working with really wonderful people who do things that that we shouldn't underestimate as far as what you actually give back to the audience. and as you've done today. So please join me in thanking us very much.